My name is Gregg Schoenberg. I'm the managing partner at Wescott Capital. I advise companies involved in financial innovation. I have also been a contributor at TechCrunch, and I'm the co-founder of the Financial Revolutionist. I'm here today with Adam Roseman and Milana Lewis, two really exciting companies. We're looking forward to addressing the core topic of how fintech companies such as theirs and others are addressing the desperately needed issues that people across the country are facing thanks to the COVID-19 virus. Before we get into that, I'd like to just kind of set the stage a little bit by giving each of you an opportunity to describe your company and kind of tell us a little bit about your sort of overarching view about what you're seeing in the world that you operate in. So let me turn it over to you first, Milana.
Sure. I'm Milana. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a Los Angeles-based company called STEM. We are primarily software and a platform for musicians that help them run their business. And what that means is we help them get their music into Apple and Spotify and Amazon and all the major services. And the innovation that we brought to the market is we eliminate the crazy delay and waterfall of payments that prevent artists and songwriters and producers from getting paid. So as you distribute a song through STEM, you put in all of the shareholders on that song level into STEM. They each get invited to confirm their split, put in their banking information, and as that song starts generating money, they get paid directly, and all of the shareholders get paid directly. The new product we brought to market a couple months ago is called Scale, and what that enables us to do is to enable our artists who get paid through STEM, any artist, any of the people that work with the artist who are shareholders, to take an advance of up to a year's worth of their income, collateralizing their music as the asset so that they could have money to grow their business, invest in themselves, and effectively use for anything that they need.
So to put it in fintech terms, Milana, would it be fair to say that you're kind of like Carta for the music industry?
We're Carta for the music business today, and we are, really solving the problem of people getting paid. And what's unique in the music business is that to solve the payables piece, you have to actually solve the revenue component as well, because people usually get paid on a percentage basis off of either a project that they worked on or the person that they're working for.
Got it. Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. Adam, let's turn it over to you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Adam Roseman with a company called Steady, based in Atlanta. Also have a large office in LA. Our focus is on helping low to moderate income workers make more money. The whole genesis of the business was, our belief that dating back to 2017, when we looked at the trend line of American workers who were having to generate more than one source of income on a monthly basis in order to make ends meet, approaching 50% of the workforce. We looked at what was driving those trends, specifically the Uberization of enterprise, effectively businesses moving very quickly to adopt systems that enabled them to better match labor supply with demand. Combined with the fact that wages for low to moderate income workers were not keeping pace with cost of living. And then lastly, the prospect of automation carrying forward and eliminating a large number of work supply hours. Our belief was that the world was going to get more and more challenging. We could never have imagined what we were seeing in the course of the last month in terms of the impact that it had on our workers and the challenges that they're now facing.
But just to clarify, is the sort of core target market you're going after the gig worker market, or is it for people who are W-2 earners, but they just have a fair bit of volatility in what they're going to make and little predictability?
Yeah, so it's the low to moderate income worker. And so for us, today, what does that look like? It's effectively, again, someone who needs to generate their income from more than one source. in that they're unable and not able to generate sufficient income from one employer or one contracting entity. So for us today, about 80 to 85% of our workers have at least one form of W-2 work, which is generally hourly work in the restaurant business, hospitality, logistics and transportation, retail, healthcare services, and then about 20 to 25% will do full-time gig or contract work. There is gig work that's done by the 80% that's doing some form of core hourly work, but that's not their primary income stream.
Gotcha. Okay. That's very helpful. And I'm going to get back to the issues surrounding the CARES Act and how that's impacting your customers and the like. But before I do, I just kind of want to ask you more broadly. Both of you are mission-driven entrepreneurs. You've, built businesses with a real sense of purpose. And recently, it seems like every company is a mission-driven company, and for good reason, right? There are more important things these days than just earning profits. But I want to ask you guys, in terms of what your fingertips tell you, do you think that, again, based upon the folks that you're speaking to, your customers and the like, are we going to go on a different trajectory moving forward, even after COVID-19 passes? Or do you think that, most people in your world are kind of hoping that we somehow return to the way in which life was prior to COVID-19? Either one of you can just chime in.
Happy to jump in here. Yeah. I think for our workforce in particular, which is about 2 million workers on our platform right now, the prospects of them being able to go back to the way things were 3 months ago is a dream, right? It's not happening. If you look at the statistics relative to our workforce today, we're able to have visibility into their earnings data. In that, a big part of what we do is look at bank account transactional data based on linked accounts of our workers to understand how they're earning across industry, across geo, is that we've already seen north of 20% of our workers have had their income go to zero over the course of the last month. We have another 41% that have had at least a 50% loss of income. And these are individuals that fall into the spectrum of those that, when you hear about 50% of the American households today not having $500 to cover an emergency expense, these are those individuals, right? And their income is plummeted. They are in industries where you see companies that are, filing for bankruptcy or closing their doors left and right already, whether it be restaurants, whether it be large retailers. The prospect of jobs coming back to those industries quickly and then being able to get back to the way they were is just not going to happen.
Milana, you've spoken to me about how the artists on your platform are really entrepreneurs, and you think of them as such, and they oftentimes employ a lot of people and the like. Do you think they're going to approach, again, after COVID-19 hopefully passes, are they going to approach how they build their businesses differently? Or are they going to try to risk manage differently, be more diversified in their income streams? What's your sense of that? Yeah,
definitely. So, after Napster blew up the music business in the early 2000s, because less musicians were making money through the recorded music side, because music suddenly became free, they had a huge shift of focus to live. And live, over the last couple of decades, has become the primary revenue stream for a number of bigger acts, primarily because it's the highest margin for them, right? Most artists who are signed to major labels see less than 10 to 15% of the revenue that should be coming down to them, if any. And so there's been a huge focus on touring, and the other sort of secondary revenue stream that has a high margin for artists has been merch. And for the most part, a lot of them have been using digital as more of a way to engage fans. Streaming has become really interesting in the last 5 to 6 years as the revenue has increased. And what we've seen is a new generation of artists that are emerging that perform pretty well on streaming, but may not necessarily be the kind of artist that you would go and see live. So now the whole artist community has, there's different types of artists. There's artists who are great at live that don't tour so well. And there's artists that are great at streaming that, or vice versa, that are great at touring that don't necessarily stream so well, and vice versa. And so what one thing that I think a lot of musicians have been late to is figuring out how to grow their digital revenue streams, right? A number of them have figured out how to grow endorsement revenue and brand partnerships, whether it's in the real world or through digital and social channels. But one thing that I think we're going to start seeing a shift back to is thinking about how you monetize your core fan base, right? Your super fans online. And when I was growing up and listening to music, I remember being a part of the NSYNC fan club, an email fan club, and paying money to be a part of that. And I got special things in the mail from them and just right? Patreon has done a really great job at productizing this type of engagement and making it super simple for creators of any type to build that type of relationship with their fans. And I think we're going to start seeing a lot more artists looking at some of these platforms that enable that type of engagement and thinking about how do they monetize their core fans, and then how do they scale that to maybe their secondary fans and their general fans through various things like live streaming and such. I think right now we're not sure what the duration of this world is going to look like, right? We don't know how long it's going to be from today until we can go back to Coachella. It's probably not going to be, this year. I think the notion of huge live events with tons of people attending them is going to change, and it's going to evolve over time. And until then, how do you as a fan engage with a broad audience online, and how do you monetize that is, I think, the thing that everyone is thinking a lot about today. And I think there's products that have tried to launch and maybe didn't find product market fit last year or previous years that are starting to probably have a real opportunity right now.
Well, it sounds like more diversity moving forward in revenue streams is the key for your folks. To kind of swing it back to the CARES Act, which obviously was a huge program billed as a way to help Americans get by. Adam, from what you know about it, and it's a big law, and there's a lot of different pieces I understand. Are you generally satisfied that it is addressing many of the urgent and critical needs that your customers have, or where do you stand on it?
Yeah, I think it's a great first attempt, but in terms of the CARES Act being in a position right now to be able to carry these workers through, we're talking about millions of hourly and gig workers. The prospect of this being able to do that in itself is not very high. In terms of specifics, liquidity means everything right now, right? For these households, for these families that are struggling so mightily, and they had immediate income drops. There's a lot of these individuals that do this form of work. They either get paid. They get paid on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, but many of them draw those funds early, right? Through digital fintech platforms that enable them to be able to do this, or employer-sponsored platforms. And so the moment that their earnings evaporated, they were simply unable to pay the bills. And the number of our workers that we hear on a daily basis now who are struggling, many of them waiting in lines for unemployment offices throughout the country to be able to get through and get their filings done. The number of those that don't even know what to do because they've never had to think about unemployment in the past. And then the red tape that still exists specifically for those that don't have just a single form of consistent W income where they had 100% job loss, right? It's just confusing, and the funds aren't flowing. And so these individuals, who were already living on the edge, who had no savings, they're just not paying their bills. And that's why, saw a statistic published a few days ago, 32% of Americans didn't pay their rent this month, right, in April. And if you talk about the low to moderate income population that we're targeting, you're probably talking about 50% to 2/3 of them didn't. They couldn't because they're not earning. And so, what's critical right now is for the funds to flow to eliminate any prospect of red tape whatsoever. To, if anything, there's going to be UI fraud, right? I mean, it's going to happen, but right now, running the risk and even funding the risk or whatever that overage is going to be as a result of some outliers who try to take advantage of the system, the prospect of spending so much time trying to prevent that versus getting the money into people's hands who can't pay their bills. We just need to blow through that.
So Milana, what are you hearing in terms of the artists that you work with who oftentimes have employees that they want to try and help during this time?
Yeah, definitely. So we work with bigger name artists and independent artists, right? Some of the bigger names that we're known for working with are the likes of people like Keith Urban, Frank Ocean. We work with artists across all genres, and we primarily work with our management team. And an artist of that size really represents the same sort of composition of a small business, right? They have their core management team of 5 to 6 people, but then when they're touring, they bring hundreds of people on tour with them to put on their production, right? And because touring is no longer a revenue stream that's going to exist for at least this period of time, a lot of those employees have, no income right now. And just like you said, Adam, they're struggling to prove any type of statements around what their previous income looked like because it's erratic, right? They are oftentimes also gig economy workers. They are 1099. They don't have stable incomes. They're not on salaries. They're usually paid on a weekly basis when they're on tour. And so for them to verify what their income was like before isn't easy to put that information together. And on top of that, the business is often, all of the people actually that work in the music business, they're not really salaried. Ironically, the only people who are kind of salaried are the ones who are the artists that are signed to the major labels. They're actually work for hire W-2 employees for the most part when they're signing a major label deal, but everyone around them are gig economy workers, right? They're freelance. They're oftentimes not even making money up front. They're making money on a commission, like the managers and the agents and others. And so a lot of the CARES Act, some of it hopefully will give them some type of benefits. I think maybe some silver lining could be that this is the first time any of these gig economy workers are going to get any type of benefits at all, because primarily they're exempt from that. But it's really a challenge for them to even know how to access this information. The SBA process has been so confusing, and it's been really unsettling. And I think, what we've seen, because we launched the Scale product, is a lot of interest in any of the shareholders, at least for the songwriters, producers, the artists. They know that through STEM Scale, they can request an advance against their earnings, and we don't need them to provide any additional paperwork, right? Because we know what the revenue of the songs are, and we can forecast and underwrite based on that revenue, which is providing a lot of, just sort of like cushion for them in the meantime while they sort out all the other stuff long term. But there's tremendous revenue losses right now happening in the business.
Adam, I want to talk to you in a little bit about what you guys are doing to try and help your customers during this difficult time. But I just kind of want to ask you one other thing first. You mentioned a lot of your workers, Milana, are gig workers, and it's the same, for you, Adam. And I'm just struck by the fact that while $1,200 per adult is great, and that can go a decent way in certain pockets of the country. In my home state of New York, the average healthcare premium per year is $8,000. And so I just want to ask you both in terms of, just how far $1,200 per adult can bridge in light of the fact that healthcare is obviously a huge expense, let alone rent and other things. I mean, what's your take? Like, would you applaud an additional stimulus package? Do you think that we have bought ourselves a fair bit of time based upon the folks that you interact with? What's your sense, Adam?
Yeah, my sense is that we're moving into the the era of being forced into the era of what Bernie Sanders has been preaching for a long time, in that we are not going to be set up to be able to provide work for a large portion of the population for the foreseeable future, right? And yet $1,200 is greatly insufficient. I think the bigger impact for an individual, a household right now, would be the expansion of unemployment insurance, where they're providing for an additional $600 a week. But again, the red tape that's involved in terms of getting through and actually qualifying for that right now, to the extent that you have not in the past, local unemployment offices are just not set up to be able to process the millions and millions of workers that are now coming through. So it's going to take them a long time, and it's only a temporary expansion. And what that temporary expansion is I mean, it effectively becomes UBI, right? It's $600 plus whatever the local UI allocation has been historically, typically between like $350 and $500 a month, depending on the state. And so you're talking about $1,000 to $1,100 a week of income that's being provided at the maximum level once someone actually does qualify. That's okay, right? But I think the way that it's set up right now is it's set up in a fashion where it's very temporary, and that people are not getting through and qualifying. But for us to be able to continue on a path where we're going to have, be able to prevent, 15, 20, 25% of the households in the country from just simply having no work, and losing their homes, being able to pay their expenses in terms of just the derivative impact it's going to have on the entire ecosystem of the economy. There's going to, from my perspective, I didn't have a clear position on things like UBI prior to this happening, but now I don't see any way to avoid it, specifically for a large number of workers that just aren't going to be able to find work for the foreseeable future.
Well, your point is it's happening or it will happen through the back door, even if it doesn't happen through the front door. And maybe you put a different name on it, and then that makes it a little bit more palatable to some people in our country. Milana, in terms of the artists that you work with who have gig workers and the like, who are essentially part of their team, how do they pay for healthcare, and what are they going to do moving forward?
It's a great question. It's a huge problem in the music business because musicians are not generally unionized workers. I think the only union workers are the crews that work at the theaters or the venues, but for the most part, everyone else, the songwriters, producers, they have to figure out how to get it independently. And this has been a fundamental problem for a long time. And this whole COVID, unfortunate circumstance is really exacerbating it because there is no easy way for these people to access healthcare. It's very on an individual level, right? And it's expensive for them. Unlike actors who can get health insurance through SAG and AFTRA and their unions, musicians don't have access to anything like that.
And Adam, I would imagine that many of the folks on your platform don't have access to anything like a SAG either, or a good union. Can you talk about Steady Together and the things that you are doing to try and help during this period?
Yeah, so we decided as an organization that, again, the world had changed for our workforce, and we were going to have to make some adjustments to our forward-looking product roadmap in order to be able to really address the pain points that our workers were facing. And so one of the key tenets of that, which I think you're referring to, is our support of our workers through providing them with access to telemedicine. And so beginning at the very early part of May, as soon as we get the integration done, we're going to be launching effectively what we're doing is covering the equivalent of a premium for our members so that they're able to access telemedicine support 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for $25 per visit, which would be a doctor, a PA, or a nurse practitioner. And this can cover urgent care, can cover, are you afraid that you may have symptoms of COVID-19 and you need feedback before you go to a facility? It could even include, your children. And I think especially during this time, you have, as a result of a lack of health insurance, people's inability to pay the $250,000, $500,000 it's going to take you to go and have an urgent care visit or an emergency room visit. And so what we're trying to do is prevent them from having to have that. I think in addition to that, you have just the fear factor of folks leaving their homes now, and that they're afraid that if they go to any type of a medical facility, they're going to pick up and catch something worse than what they actually had when they got there. And so being able to access that from home was really important. So for us, we addressed those key pain points. A couple other items that we thought were super important were we just launched a section of our app that provides for clarity around what work is actually available right now during COVID-19 to give people a fighting chance. And that if you go to a traditional jobs board and you search in the search bar, you're going to see hundreds of thousands or millions of listings of jobs that are still going to be out there. There's going to be recs open, but they're not going to fill them. So you're going to waste your time applying to things that are just going to disappear to into the nether. So it's important for us to have people invest their time wisely and know actually where they can get work in their areas and based on their qualifications. And then lastly, we've partnered up with a group in San Francisco called the Workers Lab, who's raised the Workers Fund to give away several $1 million over the course of the coming weeks to individuals where we're able to identify in their bank accounts that they've had major income loss in categories that would be attributable to COVID-19. So no questions asked. We're providing $100 to $1,000 grants to those individuals when we identify that income loss.
When the economy begins to show some signs of life, what sector do you believe will kind of lead the way?
Yeah, I think it's going to be home-based services, right? So I think people are going to want to, interact with as few of individuals as possible in their lives because it's just until we have a vaccine. I think that's just going to be the nature of the beast. And so, people's willingness to have home-based services and things done for them that would prevent them from having to go out into large, public venues where they're going to interact with a lot of individuals is where we're going to see the most growth. I mean, we already see it with Instacart and Shipt in terms of the number of our workers in Amazon that are doing delivery work for those platforms now, and the earnings increase. I think things like that and other services that enable and protect you from being able to go out into large crowds are going to skyrocket.
What about like health aides and other sort of workers within the broader medical community? It would seem like that would be an area of growth too.
Yeah, the Bureau of Labor Services under the Department of Labor had already forecast, healthcare services to be the biggest growth area between now and 2030, with 5 million new jobs that were needed during that period of time. So yes, for us, absolutely suggesting to folks basic healthcare service qualifications that they can obtain, things like effectively home aides, nursing assistants, things that can be obtained within a very short period of time with online courses is going to be an area that is going to provide opportunity for people. But in terms of the number of those new jobs that are being created relative to the job loss, I just want to highlight again, it's a small fraction.
Gotcha. Okay, well, I want to turn back to you, Milana, because I think we all need a little bit more music in our life these days. And I just want to ask you, in a world where social distancing, unfortunately, is going to be with us for a long period of time, is there hope that somehow that can be reconciled with live events, whether they take place in the desert or take place virtually? Is there any hope you see on the horizon?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, listen, one thing I know for sure is that we're already seeing a lot more new music from established acts being distributed, right? Like we've seen a huge spike in activity on STEM. More artists are at home being inspired to make music, right? And I think we can all agree that music unites us. The power of a musician is to put the things that we feel and that we're seeing in the world into words and melodies that we can all relate to, but maybe we don't have the ability to do ourselves. So people are turning to music for entertainment, right? Right now it's all happening virtually. I'm sure many of you have seen engagement on Instagram where so many of your musicians you follow are streaming live on Instagram. And right now they're doing it as a way to connect with their fans. One of our artists, Timbaland, who's a huge producer, has been collaborating live with so many different songwriters and artists virtually, which has been really interesting. This right now is not happening in a way where they're monetizing it. But I think you're going to start seeing more and more events that musicians are organizing and performing on platforms like Twitch, on YouTube Live. You're going to start seeing potentially some VR experiences being produced. We're starting to see and having lots of conversations about ways that artists can monetize their businesses online and how do they create that same experience virtually while they can't go and tour and while they can't go and be in person. I think that live events are for sure going to be a part of our future. It's going to take time to get back to the place that we were. I imagine that, there's going to be incremental movement. So as restrictions for large gatherings start to loosen up, I think that we'll see things trickle through, like maybe a theater that used to be able to accommodate 1,000 tickets or 1,000 seats sells out the capacity at like a third of that. to start, right? And so if you're going to a show with a friend, you're not sitting in the seats next to each other, you're sitting a couple seats apart to sort of create that space before it comes back to being theaters that are fully packed. I think it's easier to enforce that in a theater with seats than it is in the desert, right? Because what are you gonna do, put like rings around people where they can stand? I mean, I'm sure you can have people wearing hula hoops. Like, I don't know, there's a bunch of memes online with funny versions of what that could look like. But I think that, you know, the reality is so much of live is also subsidized by big brands. And I think we're looking to some of the brands out there today that are really, you know, doing well in this economy. Like a lot of the CPG brands and home goods and food and beer and alcohol and everything to step up and help provide the funding for these events to happen virtually. And I think we're going to see some innovation. I think we're going to see things that are exciting. I think for a lot of my friends who are at-home parents who, regardless of what's going on in the real world, will probably be stuck at home with their kids on a weekend anyways, or aren't able to go out to as many live shows. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting options for them to still engage and see shows and interact with their favorite artists. So I think there's some silver lining. I can tell you for sure, I don't think that, you know, I don't think for the music business is going to take a long time to recover completely. I think we're going to start, this is the thing that we needed to force our thinking differently and to innovate, because there's so much opportunity for artists to engage online with their fans. And I think fans want more ways that, luckily the tools and technology exists to do it. We just haven't, the music community hasn't embraced it the way that it should. And it could, and we'll see how that works out.
Well, let's keep our fingers crossed. I'll let you get back to innovating, Milana. And Adam, thank you as well. Thank you both. This was great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.